welcome to this week's episode of The Wire Wrap. I am Jahnavi and with me today I have Professor Anuradha Mitra Chenoy, who is adjunct professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs, and Ajoy Ashirwad Mahaprashasta, who is political editor of The Wire. Thank you both so much for joining me. It's been less than 10 days since Donald Trump was sworn in as the President of the United States, but we've already seen a flurry of decisions and remarks that have created some concern in the international community and within the US. He signed executive orders on matters ranging from immigration to oil exploration to climate change. And one of the very first things he did was to withdraw US support to the World Health Organization. This is something he did during his last term as well. In addition to that, he's also withdrawn the US from the Paris Agreement on climate change. As someone who takes great pride in treating diplomacy as a business deal, Trump has tried to claim credit for the ceasefire in Gaza, but at the same time he's urged Jordan and Egypt to take in Palestinians so that Gaza can be cleaned out, as he puts it. He had earlier said that he'd stop the war in Ukraine within 24 hours, but that hasn't happened yet. When it comes to India, he's had a telephonic conversation with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in which he's apparently urged India to buy more weapons and arms from Washington. He's also publicly said that the US will be imposing tariffs on countries that he thinks are harming the US with their tariffs, and he named China, India and Brazil among these. Professor Chenoy, if I can start with you. A lot of what Trump is doing is not unexpected. It is things that were very much a part of his campaign. But what do you think a Trump presidency will mean for the global order? What will it mean for multilateralism?
Well, look, I think from what he has said and the kind of people he's appointed, there are 5 major trends. There are a lot of small things, but 5 major trends. First, you can see that, the billionaires which were on the front row in the inauguration, the about 13 billionaires in his cabinet, it's going to be a government whose policies come out from the American rich. Even if he says he's targeting the American working class, the workers, the middle class, yet these are people who are not in touch with the American poor and those who voted for him, etc. So one, it is going to be that. And for them, he's also said he's going to do tax cuts and increase defense expenditure for all of NATO to 5% of the GDP, which for America it means almost $1 trillion. So how are you going to address the social expenditures or health or education? You're not. Second is that he's created all kinds of divisions and increased the polarization within American society. The first thing is, the first few orders he did was on immigration, and he's made them into what he called the national security threat as invaders, and he's got the army out for them. And then, as you mentioned, this whole thing about immediately saying that 2 sexes, only men and women, so excluding the transgender and others, and removing this very steeped in American policy on diversity, inclusion and opportunities, which means a lot of people are going to be excluded. It's going to be like a white male supremacist system. Then removing the citizenship birth, which was part of the 14th Amendment, meaning that if you're there in the US and your child is born there, even if you weren't a citizen, the child could get citizenship rights. So that has been removed arbitrarily, and since it was the 14th Amendment, it should have actually gone through the Congress, but it didn't. So which again means these divisions between local workers and migrant workers, men and women, between the sexes, between trans, so a lot of exclusions. The third set is about American exceptionalism and his whole thing of Make America Great Again, and which is linked to both internal and external policies, in which, as you just said, he has moved America out of international organizations and international treaties, which goes to show to the rest of the world that you cannot rely on the US. If they move out of health, they've stopped foreign aid except for Israel and Egypt. He's even stopped it for Ukraine for 90 days. Then he's threatened all these countries with sanctions, including the BRICS countries specifically. He has said anyone who engages with uses the dollar in trade, to which India has quickly had to say that, it's only for those countries which we have no other options. So he's disrupted and he's saying that he's going to put tariffs. Then he has said Canada should be the 51st state. So he does not respect his own closest allies. He has said Greenland, and he said it unconditionally, that Greenland, which is an autonomous region of Denmark, should be ours. And it's a great place and we need it, that's all. And already sent his son on a recce to Greenland, who said it'll be a great golf course. But the point is, behind all this, there's a kind of recolonization. Focus on the Western sphere. The first trip of Rubio, his Secretary of State, is to 4 Latin American countries, including to Panama, for which he wants to seize the Panama Canal and change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. So it's not just a change of name, it's actually saying that our sovereignty extends over the Americas. So from Canada to Panama to Colombia, where he, did the first threat of sanctions, his focus is on that, and the whole thing, I think, is too extractive, because he wants to seize the natural resources in a place like Greenland, which is near the Arctic, and there is a rush towards the Arctic with climate change, and the Russians have an interest there. The North Sea route is opened up, so he wants to confront them there. So it's both extractive and distractive. Distractive with the spectacle and his language, and extractive in what he wants to extract. Then on the Middle East, as you said, on Israel, first he said that, look at me, I'm the one who could put a ceasefire in place, but alongside with that, he was able to do that, which is hats off to him and gives him credit, but he did it with an element of power. He kind of took the carpet under the feet of Netanyahu and Biden. They said he couldn't do it for the last 6 months. But at the same time, he said he removed the sanctions from the Israeli settlers in the West Bank, which meant a whole amount of immediate violence and seizure of Palestinian properties in the West Bank. Like a genocide of Gaza, it got transferred also to the West Bank, which he thinks is great property also. And Gaza, because Gaza, number one, it's on the ocean, and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, even in his last term, said this would make great amount of sea-facing properties, and these people should be cleaned out. So again, it's property versus, or not people, profits and property versus people. So people should be dispensed with, and these should go to Jordan. But what will be the impact? It will destabilize the Middle East completely, because his interest in the Middle East, again, is about his exceptionalism and making America the exceptional, unilateral, hegemonic, retaining it as a power at a time when there are forces of polarity, and other countries, they might have, the same capitalist neoliberal policies, but nonetheless, they're not the United States, and they value their sovereignty, which he does not, and he wants to use threats and sanctions. Then, of course, he does say that he wants to have a deal with Russia on Ukraine. He doesn't want to give Ukraine back. He knows it's a losing game, that Russia is winning the war. So why should Russia negotiate on a bad wicket now? But at the same time, he is interested in a peace deal there. Why? And my argument is that he has reworked what the Americans said earlier. Earlier they said NATO is for keeping America in, Russia out, Germany down. Now he's twisted it to, of course, keeping America on top, keeping Russia down, keeping the Chinese out, and making the rest as satellites. So you can see his European allies, they've not been able to say a thing about Greenland. So that's how much they have been pressurized to be satellites of the US. So really, there were some sweeteners in what he said. All these were, will be seen very negatively, and I don't think they will make America great again. They'll make it controversial. They might use the force. It might be more transactional and more tariffs, but they're not going to become a manufacturing power to contest China or even Indonesia or India in 2 years. It'll take time because they had to some extent deindustrialized, and their USP was these tech billionaires for which China is challenging them now. And India is providing all kinds of software people. So, it's not going to be easy. But the sweetness, I thought, was the fact that he said that he would honor the First Amendment of the US Constitution, which is on free speech. And under Biden, that had really taken a beating because you were not allowed to be critical of Israeli policies on Gaza, as you saw in the campuses, etc. And they really went after people who said the word even genocide. So he said he would bring that back, but that's something to be seen. We don't know. Anyone wants to criticize him may not be allowed, because just yesterday he passed an executive order that all federal assistance to all institutions be frozen. And what's the reason? He wants to make sure that any institution which is practicing this DEI, that is, inclusion and equity, etc., as he calls them, Marxist, should be off federal funding. So he's going to transact with them. And even something like the Los Angeles fires, which he should have had an open heart in giving assistance to stop those fires, he has made a transactory deal in which he has said that they should have, California should have voter IDs, which they have resisted all this while. Only then he would give them aid. So this daily transaction of putting pressure is making the US actually, it's decreasing their democracy, their autonomy, the separation of powers, and what the United States really stood for. And the last bit of sweetener, which he has said that he would like disarmament talks on the nuclear issue with Russia and China, but we have to see if he actually does it. So, but the beginning is definitely very controversial and difficult.
Ajoy, looking at it from an Indian perspective, we know that during his last presidency, Trump and Narendra Modi had this sort of very buddy-buddy relationship going. He came to India to that huge event in Ahmedabad. Modi had a similar event in the US. Do you think that relationship is likely to look the same again?
Yeah, so what last time a segment of business class, they were kind of very wary of the fact how Trump was going about his rhetoric. But it turned out that his rhetoric was kind of more dangerous than what actually conspired in reality in terms of how Indian businesses were affected. And in terms of politics in India, like I was just kind of, the European Council on Foreign Relations recently released a survey earlier this month where India tops the list of whether the Trump administration, a second coming of Trump, would be beneficial for your own country. And India tops the list with over 84% respondents believing that Trump is good for India, while all the trends which she was also talking about, what Trump has is kind of pointing towards the contrary. He's talking about protection tariffs, so that immediately kind of has the potential to disturb India's startup right now. In 2014, if you had around 450 kind of startups, so and that has kind of increased to around 1.5 lakhs now, and almost 60% of this 1.5 lakh startups in India is funded by US based venture capital funds. So if Trump, for example, introduces all kinds of protectionist tariffs and pressurizes these VCs to invest in the US, a number of startups will be directly affected. Similarly, for the IT sector, if you see, is entirely almost over half the IT sector is dependent on outsourcing for US units. And if that is stopped, because Trump wants to generate employment in India, in the US, and because of his kind of protectionist policies, so that will also be directly impacted. I was speaking with a few kind of IT sector experts, and they are also kind of looking at it with a great deal of suspicion right now, and they are not taking a position currently, because they want to see how actually what Trump is saying right now, how it unfolds in reality. But if that happens, it will cost a lot of jobs in here. So, but this is also a kind of opportunity for India, what Narendra Modi also always talks about, building a manufacturing sector here. And also it is an opportunity because Trump is kind of realigning the whole world order in terms of, if the US goes protectionist, then it will be India has a chance to kind of look for different routes, say China, and this may actually end up forcing Narendra Modi to build better relations with China. But but right now the immediate impact I can see is like, if I remember correctly, India's exports to the US is around 18%, and that will directly be impacted if Trump impose these taxes. So all of these factors will come into play, and currently it's too early to kind of speculate of how things will kind of unfold. But right now it doesn't look good for India, and Trump has made sure that he gives the right signals. While Narendra Modi here can keep addressing Trump as his dear friend, there is a Trump who immediately after assuming power has called India the biggest tariff abuser, and he wants to dismantle BRICS and any kind of, and doesn't, and is seeing the whole world and countries as property and as markets rather than building alliances. So last phone call with Modi and Trump, so it was clear from the White House statement that Trump asked Modi to import more and more arms from the US, which is kind of directly challenging India, which is importing a lot more arms and weapons from Russia. So he wants to be the bigger player in India, and he will do that, and he will bargain with India around those lines and not let a country like India be on its own. So India will have to kind of figure out, as our founding editor Venu also wrote in our thing, that India doesn't have a proper strategy to deal with these kind of imminent possibilities, and there is it just hopes that Trump, being the anti-liberal or anti-immigrant kind of
that rhetoric will pull them together.
so that may kind of bring Modi and Trump together, but that doesn't look very imminent right now. And China has already been planning to kind of, and is prepared to kind of tackle this kind of disruptions in the global economic order. It has devalued its currency. It is already going very deep in its technological advances, be it AI or EV, some tech of the future, and it is challenging the US dominance. India doesn't have any of those things. It is entirely dependent on working for these companies, the service sector. They don't have a manufacturing sector to kind of compete with any of these global powers. So it has to, I think India will be forced to kind of think along lines which may not look to remain independent. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the White House communication of the call, which actually looked quite different from the Ministry of External Affairs, which was trying to focus on other parts of their discussions, like the situation in the Middle East and stuff, but the White House was very clear on the focus. Would you agree that it's perhaps not looking so good for India over the next 4 years, and unless there's some creative strategizing that comes up?
Yeah, I think Ajoy was right, because you see the words India uses for its foreign policy, multi-vector, strategic autonomy, voice of the global south, and they want more transaction and that it should be linked to India's growth story. Now, if a country like the United States is going to put so much tariffs and it's going to put this sword of Damocles on our head, that you do this or we will put these tariffs and and buy more from us, and they want India to buy more oil from them, which will be much more expensive given that it's fracking, it's so much of a distance, in an effort to circumvent the oil we get from the Middle East and Russia. So we have to do at their bidding. The other thing is India is after a defense agreement with them in which they would like some amount of good transfer of technology. But our experience with them has already shown that despite the earlier agreements like the logistics exchange memorandum, etc., we did not get the kind of technologies that we wanted and the cutting edge technologies. In fact, the barriers against them are likely to increase. And the cost is going to be very high in terms of our strategic autonomy. They would like, of course, India to be a satellite because of this plan to curtain off China or to circumvent China or even have a war with them if necessary, though Trump is he's a bit cautious about wars, new wars. But still he'll have, it's hybrid war season. So he'll have trade wars, he'll have AI wars, hacking wars, all kinds of things. So there will be a Cold War for sure, and he would like India to be part of it. You know, it's strategically very important. But India doesn't want to be a Philippines. It doesn't want to be a South Korea. And you can see the mess they're in. So it's not going to be easy, and I think Ajoy is right in all the details that he gave.
Moving now to the more domestic issue, this year marks 75 years since the Indian Constitution was adopted. Now, over the last few years, we've been seeing several constitutional institutions, whether it's the judiciary or the election commission or others, come under accusations of no longer being independent in the way that they were imagined, and instead leaning into the ideology of the ruling government and doing as it bids, so to say. We saw this during, but at the same time, the constitution is also being used as a symbol of protest. We saw this during the Anti-Citizenship Amendment Act protests and in others. And during the 2024 elections, several leaders of the BJP openly came out and said that the reason they wanted to win more than 400 seats in parliament was to change the constitution. Now, this was not rhetoric that was very popular, so the party leadership tried to distance themselves to an extent, but these candidates were not removed, and obviously we know that 400, the 400 par didn't work out for them. Because they were saying that, this whole idea of saving the constitution became a big part of the opposition campaign as well. Ajoy, I wanted to start with you. 75 years after this document came into being, how do you think India is going on the path that it had laid out? How do you respond to these allegations of this document and the ideas it espoused being under attack from the current government?
Yeah. Jahnavi, for a long time, I thought like constitution is like a document which only informed people knew about until the last 10 years, and the kind of these constitutional values like free speech, like right to protest, right to dissent, these are like kind of ingrained in the Indian mindset, and in the last 75 years, we have seen like people responding very, very critically to emergency or any form of curbs on freedom of speech, and also curbs. But the last 10 years has seen so much of suppression of all these kinds of fundamental rights, people who the right to practice their own faith, right to speak as they wish, and all these kind of fundamental rights have been attacked so much that you generally, there is a kind of abiding consciousness that, and the way people have responded to it, I had to change my opinion that no, constitution is not just a document which can be read and understood by a section of educated people, but it is actually a document where people are kind of living in the shadows of the spirit of that constitution, and not for nothing that the 2024 elections saw constitution as one of the political factors in kind of determining the outcome of the elections, the 400 par you were talking about. And we know that, okay, people, and there was a substantial kind of fear among people who have, especially the underprivileged, the marginalized, the vulnerable of India, who thought that, okay, 400 par is something which can completely erode our whatever we have got from the Indian state. There has
The ending
in
of
Indian
reservation was
democracy,
one of
the
those.
state delivery systems has always been like incomplete, or in it's had not been perfect, far from perfect. But this sense of security that the constitution gave to the underprivileged was kind of very ingrained mentally, and they responded to it. They weakened the BJP in areas which BJP considered its strongholds. No one had expected that that BJP, which pitched kind of its Ram Mandir campaign or everything around, and they lost UP, they lost Maharashtra also. So it was a broader mood that the constitution is under attack, and the thing is that despite the fact that the RSS and the Sangh Parivar have tried very hard to kind of remove all the memories of what they stood for, they have always been opposers of constitution historically. And there were Golwalkar, you take Golwalkar, you take BJP's previous avatar Jan Sangh, their leaders Shyama Prasad Mukherjee or Savarkar, all of them and many associates of RSS and the Sangh, they have been openly critical of the constitution, saying that there's nothing Indian about it, and they instead preferred Manusmriti or Bhagavad Gita and these kind of texts, pre-modern texts, to be kind of to be brought in as a constitutional document. And we have seen, like in many in the 1980s, we had carried one article where from a BJP MP's house here in New Delhi, a section of saints associated with the Sangh Parivar, they brought out a constitutional document saying that ये अखंड भारत का संविधान है, which borrowed a lot of doctrines from Manusmriti, kind of legitimized untouchability, spoke of Muslims and Christians as secondary citizens, and so these are so which completely went against the grain of Indian constitution, which imagined our country to be a socialist, secular, and and a country which will respect and give dignity to all. And recently at the Mahakumbh, I was reading this story in the Telegraph where similarly this section of saints have brought out again a document, that this 501 page document which could be India's constitution, and the event was attended by none other than BJP MPs like Hema Malini, Sadhvi Prachi, and they were all kind of legitimizing that event. So despite the fact that this government can keep talking about how they respect the constitution and indulge in different kinds of misinformation even in the parliament, the fact is that the broader ecosystem of the Hindu right here, they are against the liberal constitution that India adopted. So yeah, so the 75th year is also a cause of celebration that India could sustain itself as a country with this liberal document as a guiding force, but also a cause of also a moment where we have to worry whether this constitution will remain our guiding force eventually or not, because there are all sorts of attempts to either weaken it, if not entirely change it, because that is very difficult to do in India, but they are systematically removing each and every liberal principle and liberal of the constitution very systematically. So
in many ways, the constitution was the first big project to come out of independent India, you know, an attempt to build a decolonized republic and a path forward for it. But for the current regime, as Ajoy was saying, you know, this is not a document that they've ever really supported, the Sangh Parivar as a whole. And their idea of what decolonization is, they have walked to mean something completely different, like going back to documents like the Manusmriti, because they see most of medieval India, where the region had Islamic rulers, also to be part of this colonial project. They don't think colonialism came with the British. What is it about the constitution, and like Ajoy said, it's endured for 75 years, which in many other post-colonial countries, the constitutions have changed so many times, but here we've had this document with many amendments, of course. What is it, do you think, that captures public imagination and has endured even though it is under attack even from the ruling regime?
I think my opinion is that, number one, this constitution came out from a long nationalist kind of project, which was very diverse, it was very organic, it was very grassroots, and it was genuinely anti-colonial, and it included many small communities, and it was very federal also in its nature. So even if it was led, or if it was at that time, that information went all over. So for me, the constitution is a living document, and it is the idea of India. If you don't have this constitution, of course there were a lot of amendments, over 175 amendments, and some very good amendments like the 144th on, including 30% women in panchayats, etc. So, and of course there can be changes because it was very culturally specific at that time. Women's rights were not the same as women are demanding now. But considering, that the Dalits got a say, the tribal India got a say, were very progressive, far-reaching things. So they really encapsulate the soul of India, and to remove very key parts of it will not just destroy the constitution, they will, I think, destroy India. And now this coalition government obviously is somewhat aware of it, because their rhetoric on it has decreased to some extent.
In fact, like recently attending one Harsh Mander's talk, and he said that constitution did not only assure Indian citizens of equal rights, but also equal belonging, where people could kind of feel that they belong here, irrespective of caste, religion, faith, creed, whatever. But in the last 10 years, we see like almost 14% of India's minorities, they don't feel that they're made to kind of all the time feel that they don't belong here, and they are every time even being like a Muslim has become a cause for fear and insecurity in India, as we have seen. And these are people who are constantly told by elected MPs and legislators to go to Pakistan, or are being addressed as Pakistanis. And it was, and this is what is being done by the elected MPs. And similarly, if you look at the number of atrocities on scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, who the government, the powers who are running the government right now, they want to kind of assimilate in, but the number of atrocities against them has drastically increased. So they are also kind of constantly told that, okay, you may have, this is the time where you can get political opportunities, but their kind of upward mobility is looked at with contempt by people who support this government, the upper castes and the feudal lords which this government has empowered. So overall, if you look at it, that people who follow the doctrines of Manusmriti, which kind of established what is untouchability in India, and gave different degrees of punishment to people who are untouchables, very stern punishment for them for the same crime. The upper caste don't get the same punishment at all. So these kind of things, people who believe in that and want the constitution to change, they are the ones who are perpetrators of this kind of anti-constitutional spirit in India currently, through political means. So this has to be challenged somehow, and these at least needs to be debated. So that is what 75, these are the thoughts about constitution when it's finishing its 75th year.
Just to bring us to the last issue I wanted to discuss today, which is the situation with higher education in India. A few recent events held at Delhi University, which is a central university, have created some concern among students, teachers, others. The most recent was at Daulat Ram College, where there was an event to mark the 1-year anniversary of the consecration of the Ram temple in Ayodhya. The principal attended, there were leaders from the ABVP and the RSS there as well. The other was a book launch of a book called Modi versus the Khan Market Gang, written by a Doordarshan presenter. And at the launch, there was none other than the Vice Chancellor of DU, Yogesh Singh, who spoke and hailed both the book and the Modi government. Now, these are just incidents from one central university in Delhi, but such incidents have become more common over the last several years in universities across India. There's also been questions on the way recruitments have been happening, with allegations that more attention is paid to whether or not you ascribe to a right-wing ideology than your academic scholarship. An extension of this is also being seen in the University Grants Commission guidelines for 2025, and 3 states, Kerala, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, have already said that they are very opposed to these. They say that the one of the major contentions is that the state government's role in choosing vice chancellors has basically been removed entirely, and also that in other administrative procedures they are not going to have as much say. Professor Chenoy, you taught for many years at Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is also Central University in Delhi. Would you say that India's higher education landscape has changed drastically in the last 10 years, and do you see it changing further?
Yes, it has, and I have kind of deep regrets about many aspects of the change. And one thing is this UGC draft regulations. They are really because on the one hand, 2 things. First, India is one of the countries which got a leading edge over other countries of the global south because of the kind of education, public education they provided. All these people, these Sundar Pichwais and all who we are advertising, they all come from this background somewhere or the other, including the person who's the head of the World Bank. They're all MBAs or IITs or social science students from here who went to greener pastures and made a difference, and they were able to do this because of this base they had. And the fact that we paid something like 18 rupees in public education. Now the private universities are competing. So that there is that model, this so-called Birla Ambani report or something like that, which came out and it's being put into practice. The second is the public universities, which should be the base for creativity, and a lot of people in the rural areas desire it. They should have autonomy instead of this over-regulation which the UGC is trying to do, making a common entrance exam. Everywhere it's uneven, and even Bihar, which is part of the coalition government, has opposed it because they want one common entrance. So that means all the time students have to go to tuition classes, do exams rather than learn. So wisdom, learning is taking a back foot in this. Autonomy and the act of thinking creatively or criticism is an aspect of education that, if it's removed, you're tearing the lungs and heart of education. You've decided that that academics need not be vice chancellors in this act, which I think they're going to appoint generals. So they're going to they could militarize it and weaponize it. Like I know Jamia and Aligarh often had a general, a good general. Mr. Nasiruddin Shah's brother was a general who was a vice chancellor, and that curbs, they might be personally good, but an academic atmosphere is an academic atmosphere that is being eroded, and that will go a very long way in giving India a bad reputation, especially at a time when these walls against all countries of the global south are rising, and there is this anger against the very educated Indian who represented. Now they will say they are just ideological, and they're not scientific, because some of the things the vice chancellors have been saying, I haven't followed up everything, but unverified kind of claims. So we really need to rethink it and have a larger debate which includes not just students from one ideology, but from all. An open debate which should be on the whole thing of education.
Professor Chenoy did raise an important point that the JDU, which is an alliance partner, has also come out and said that it doesn't agree with these
yes.
draft
So as it is, like anything this government does, it becomes so polarizing. But this is one UGC draft regulations, the recent ones. They have managed to kind of consolidate a large number of non-BJP parties, especially in Tamil Nadu government, the Kerala government, the Karnataka government. They have already passed a resolution in the assembly demanding that these regulations be scrapped, because they have education, mind you, is in the concurrent list, and all the state universities, almost 80% of the funds, they come from the states. So they should also kind of have a say in how see what the BJP has been saying, that okay, the appointments of vice chancellors may have been politically motivated even before. But the thing is that what the current draft regulations do is that give that politically motivated, the power of making a politically motivated decision entirely to the center and not to the states at all. So this is also a breach of India's federal principles. So, but the thing is, what has happened with, see, for example, you're talking about the book launch, this Modi versus Khan Market Gang, which got kind of a stamp of approval from none other than the Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, Yogesh Singh, who went and launched that book and said that it is a book about patriotism. So what does he mean to kind of say that people who are the people in Khan Market Gang, people, economists like Amartya Sen, or social workers like Harsh Mander, who runs a number of child shelters home and works for Indian secularism. These are the people who have been labeled as Khan Market Gang, and people who are educated, people who have given their lives in public causes, in making, so these are the people who are now, and now there's, so Yogesh Singh goes ahead and says that this is a book which kind of talks about how patriotism should look like. So which is entirely kind of crawling in front of the BJP's idea of majoritarian nationalism. This is what he has done. But this is not for the first time when a book launch has happened here or in Daulat Ram College, who's gone like a step ahead and has celebrated the first anniversary of Ram Temple in Ayodhya. Before that, we have seen occasions like Lakshmi Bai College's principal doing Havans, Hansraj College making a Gaushala in a land where there could have been a women's hostel. So the priorities have entirely changed, and people who are in position with some kind of administrative authority, they are making sure that you should not offend any kind of, you should not exercise any form of institutional autonomy in front of this government, and they have agreed and they have got kind of caved into the understanding that this government would not tolerate any or brook any form of critical or institutional autonomy. And this government has made it clear since 2016, where it first kind of tried to completely, entirely change the nature of universities when it went after JNU students and made JNU as a kind of as the prop to kind of propagate its anti-liberal versus nationalist binary. So it did. So in universities, all said and done, and where however it functioned, it was by previous government, it was regarded as seats of knowledge, seats of learning and independent inquiry. And this is the kind of philosophical position that the universities adopted for themselves and the governments granted to them. This is what the BJP and the larger Sangh Parivar is opposed to. It should not be like that. It should be places where, those should be places where it should kind of become seats of majoritarian nationalism, even if that comes at the cost of poor education, the quality of education, or at the cost of any form of independent inquiry. And majoritarianism rules, and that is the only thing, and that reflects in most of their policies also, the way they have tried to rewrite history books, kind of erasing whatever there is critical and trying to kind of constantly pitch the idea of 1200 years of slavery and kind of taking a colonial position that India was only kind of. So, all of those are ideological issues, but what they have done is grave harm to any form of, see, like why I am talking, because we are talking about Trump, and Trump, when Trump was making all these noises, there was this China person in China which launched DeepSeek. So, DeepSeek, and this guy was the owner of DeepSeek, who is high flyer hedge fund. He comes from a very small town of China, and which benefited from the university systems and the social reforms there. So, and India is not doing anything to kind of make its universities stronger, make its university center for research or excellence, so that so many more people could come up and empower India. Rather, this government is trying to turn all the universities as its seat of political influence. So,
and perhaps these particular guidelines won't be able to go through, given the sort of, we've seen the non-BJP parties really coming together on this particular issue, but yes.
But you never know, because these kind of some of those things are actually barring these lateral entry into VC's position, and the other things, having a say in appointments of VCs. But there are some things which may be like good. For example, in the recent times, so many of these appointments have been happening on these academic scores, API scores. The UGC rules, new ones, are trying to make more flexible, those things more flexible, because those academic scores had become a scam. So they are looking, but most of the reforms that they are trying to, like, which may be good and also could be really bad, because all the new reforms have been left subjective, and when it is subjective in India and not quantified, anything could happen to those things. For example, like the NET, they have tried to incorporate interdisciplinary studies, which has become a norm now for appointments of teachers and faculty members. There are other such good things about the draft regulations also, which was thing, but the noise has been around how the center has been trying to control all the universities.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you both so much for joining me, and thank you for watching.